If you enjoy the content of the 80s Slasher Librarian YouTube channel and would like to sponsor the channel, then see the link in the description below for the Patreon page and start enjoying the benefits of being a patron of the 80s Slasher Librarian. Freddy Krueger's 7 Sweetest Dreams. Le Morte di Freddy. Psychiatric Notes on Gail Ann Melican. Dr. A. Curtis, Consulting Physician. Introduction. Patient is a 17-year-old white female admitted to Springwood Mental Health Center following methamphetamine poisoning due to overdose. Transferred from Springwood County General Hospital. Admission to SMHC, approved by father as legal guardian of patient. History. By all accounts, patient is a normal, healthy teenage girl. A senior at Notre Dame Academy. Private, parochial all-girls school. She states she has already been accepted at Kent State, where she plans to enroll as a music and voice major this fall. Engages in various school activities, sports, volleyball and track, assistant editor of school newspaper, member of school choir, singing group. School counselor Kay Williams reports that patient is popular, friendly, and outgoing. See attached interview transcript. Father of patient states that she leads an active social life. 4 weeks ago, patient began to complain of insomnia. See attached medical report from SCGH. Condition was apparently self-induced, as patient has expressed an almost pathological fear of falling asleep. Severe bouts of depression followed subsequently, culminating with overdose on 311 of methamphetamine, ice or crystal, apparently acquired on the street. Patient transferred from SCGH to SMHC on 3/14. Initial interview. Patient came to see me for the first time on the morning of 3/15. Her appearance was haggard, not unexpected of a chronic insomniac. She responded listlessly to my questions at first. She requested a cup of coffee, but seemed indifferent when I suggested that coffee was bad for her, especially at her age. We discussed her family situation, father and mother divorced 2 years ago, patient their only child, joint custody, both parents residing in Springwood. According to patient, the divorce was amicable. She claims to like both her parents equally well, exhibiting no resentment toward either. States that she understands her mother and father simply could not live with each other anymore. No elaboration. Father and mother both professional. Mother is personnel administrator for a multinational company based in Springwood. Father is an attorney. No evidence of physical or emotional abuse on the part of either parent. The only signs of distress patient exhibits occur when questioned about her insomnia. She insists that she cannot go to sleep because of a recurring nightmare. She reports that the dream has appeared virtually every night since its onset 4 weeks ago. My recommendation: patient's most immediate and acute problems are related to her lack of healthy sleep. I recommend she remain in SMHC for observation and psychotherapy for 7 days. Reassessment to follow at that time. Prescribe 100 milligrams Hypnosil B to suppress dreams and 100 milligrams secobarbital, both at bedtime. Dr. Andrew Curtis was 15 minutes late for SMHC's Wednesday morning staff meeting. As he was making his way to the conference room from his office, where he had stopped off to retrieve his notes for the meeting, he was trying to compose an appropriate excuse for Dr. Mayfield, the hospital's chief of staff. Curtis arrived at the conference room's door, paused to smooth his hair, and took a deep breath. What the hell, he decided. Tell the old man the truth. He pushed open the door. Dr. Geraldine Butler, the resident expert in substance addiction, was giving her weekly report. Her back was to Curtis, and she stopped in mid-sentence to turn around and glare at him. The rest of his colleagues, seated at the conference table, were staring at him as well. Doctors Brooks, Cash, Gooden, and Chandler. Dr. Lloyd Mayfield was sitting at his customary place at the head of the table. White-haired, his face seamed with age lines. A perpetual paternal air wrapped about him like a cloak. Dr. Mayfield regarded Curtis noncommittally. "Glad you could join us this morning, Andy," he said. "I'm sorry, Lloyd," said Curtis. He turned to Dr. Butler. "I apologize for interrupting you, Jerry." He shrugged. "I guess I didn't hear my alarm go off." That's the third time since January you didn't hear your alarm go off," said Dr. Butler, still glaring at him. Curtis was moving around the table to a seat next to Dr. Chandler, across from Dr. Butler. "For heaven's sakes, Jerry, it's not like I overslept on purpose just to make you mad." "Nobody else has any problem making it to staff meetings on time, Dr. Curtis," Butler chided him. "If you knew you were going to be late, could you at least have had the courtesy to telephone?"
"Jerry,"
Dr. Mayfield cautioned her sternly. She turned to him.
"I'll deal with Andy myself later, if that's all right with you."
She nodded stiffly, scowling, giving Curtis one final chilly look. She resumed narrating the report that his late arrival had interrupted. Curtis was opening the file folder, holding his notes, at the same time trying to concentrate on Dr. Butler's nasal drone, when he felt fingertips tickling his right thigh. Superstitiously, he glanced at Dr. Chandler from the corner of his eye. She was watching Dr. Butler intently, not looking at him at all. Her left hand rested on his upper leg. Curtis whispered cautioningly out of the side of his mouth, "Jean." Dr. Chandler tilted her head close to his. "If you'd gotten up when I did, Lazybones, you wouldn't be in trouble," she whispered back. Then she smiled.
"Jerry's right, you know, Andy," said Dr. Mayfield a bit later. "This is the third time since the beginning of the year you've been late to a staff meeting. What's the problem?"
Mayfield was sitting behind the dark mahogany desk that was the centerpiece of his office. Curtis was seated opposite the older man in a plush, comfortable, wing-back chair. He had been quietly studying the room as he waited for Mayfield to open their discussion, thinking, not for the first time, how much Mayfield's office was like the man himself, stately, tastefully appointed, conservative. "It's not a problem, Lloyd," Curtis answered carefully. "It's just, I don't know how to put it into words."
"Does it have anything to do with what's going on between you and Jean Chandler?"
Mayfield asked. Curtis's eyes grew large. He sputtered. How did you know?"
"Give me a little credit, please. I've only made my living observing people's behavior for the last 28 years. Mayfield smiled. "I figured you two got together, around New Year's?"
Christmas Eve," said Curtis. "Your party, in fact. Jean and I both came stag, and I ended up spending the night at her apartment."
"Is it serious?"
Curtis nodded. "Serious enough."
"Well," said Mayfield, "there isn't any anti-fraternization policy between staff members here. Not that I'd enforce one even if there was. To tell you the truth, I think you and Dr. Chandler make quite a handsome couple."
He smiled again. "Thanks," said Curtis, returning the smile. "We like to think so, too."
"There's one thing that bothers me, though," said Mayfield. "How is it that she can make it to staff meetings on time and you can't?"
Curtis could feel his face reddening.
"Try and be a little more punctual from now on, all right, Andy?" Mayfield continued. "You're a damn fine shrink, and I'd hate to have it go on your record that you let your youthful high spirits make you behave a little more irresponsibly than you probably should."
"Yes, Doctor," Curtis replied with chagrin.
"Good. Now,"
Mayfield reached for a file folder that sat in the middle of his desk. He opened the folder.
"I was going through your notes on this new patient of yours."
"Gail Melican?" said Curtis. Mayfield peered up from the folder.
"By any chance you haven't talked to Jerry about the alcohol abuse case she took on the other day, have you?"
Curtis frowned. "Jerry Butler and I don't, communicate very well, or very often." Mayfield grunted.
"I suppose I can't expect every individual on my staff to get along as splendidly as you and Jean seem to, eh? Just so long as they're civil to each other. At any rate,"
he reached for another folder that lay atop a stack in the end basket on the upper corner of his desk. He handed the second folder to Curtis. While Curtis scanned the file, Mayfield said,
Jerry's got a 16-year-old boy named Harvey Baker. Chronic alcoholism. Admitted by his parents. Both of them alcoholics, too, by the way. The boy was suffering from violent delirium tremens, apparently as a consequence of severe alcohol poisoning.
Curtis looked up from the report. Apparently? Mayfield eyed him wordlessly. Curtis closed the folder and tapped it against his leg. If it's not booze that gave this boy the DTs, he said, then what did? Mayfield leaned back in his chair.
You been working here for how long, 2 years?
Curtis nodded. About that, closer to 2.5.
Which means you came here not long after the facility was reopened. And this is the first job you've had since you, finished your residency?
Curtis nodded again. In St. Louis, where I'm from. Mayfield tinted his fingers.
And you'd never been to Springwood before you moved here to take this here job?
Lloyd, why are you asking me all this stuff you already knew? You're the one who hired me.
So I am.
Mayfield's lips drew together in a tight line. He went silent. Curtis asked, What's the matter? The older man shook his head.
It's just that something terrible happened around here a few years ago, before your time, before the county reopened the facility.
Involving what?
Not what, replied Mayfield. Who?
Okay, who then?
A monster,
Mayfield said gravely.
A monster named Freddy Krueger.
Curtis and Jean Chandler were seated at a candlelit table in the front window of Emilio's, a small, intimate Italian restaurant, a block from Dr. Chandler's apartment. Outside, an end-of-winter thunder shower that had begun shortly after sundown sent droplets of rain hammering against the window. Except for the two of them, the restaurant was deserted of customers. As they were sharing an appetizer of deep-fried calamari, Curtis asked Chandler, Have you ever heard of somebody named Freddy Krueger? Chandler blew on a piece of hot squid, trying to cool it enough so that she could pop it in her mouth. Freddy who? She asked. Freddy Krueger. A while back he was sort of a Springwoods answer to Ted Bundy. You're from Columbus, and that isn't very far away, so I thought you might have heard of him. Chandler nodded, remembering. Oh, yeah. She looked thoughtful for a moment, then sang, 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you. 3, 4, better lock your door. Curtis looked at her with surprise. That's strange. What is? You know that song? That's the second time today I've heard it. Gail Melican sang it to me this afternoon. You're Insomniac? Uh-huh. Chandler reached for another piece of squid. Every kid in this state probably knows that song by heart. My little sister used to skip rope to it. So what do you know about him? Curtis asked. Krueger? She shrugged. Didn't he murder a bunch of kids or something? That's what they say, though it was never actually proved that he did what they said he did. In courts, anyways. I remember now, Chandler said. Something like a dozen or so kids disappeared, and this Freddy Krueger was the one they arrested. They were sure he was responsible for the killings. Only when he went to trial he got off, said Curtis. He beat the rap? I remember that too. I was in college at the time. When I came home for spring break, the Krueger case was just wrapping up. He got off on some legal technicality or something, didn't he? Typical bullshit, said Curtis. He got off on a technicality. That's the phrase cops and prosecutors use whenever they fuck up an arrest. They were certain Krueger was the man, but they were so anxious to railroad the guy that they put a case together as full of holes as a piece of Swiss cheese. The dumbest defense attorney in the world could have beaten it. Their waiter appeared to remove the empty appetizer plates and refill their glasses with wine. As the waiter moved away, Chandler said to Curtis, Why'd you want to know if I'd ever heard of Freddy Krueger? Lloyd brought up the name to me today. We were going over my notes on Gail Melican, and he suggested I go down to the basement and check out some old files from 5 years ago. Chandler looked perplexed. You mean the old Weston Hills files? Curtis nodded. What in heaven's name for? Curtis said. It seems that a few months before Weston Hills closed down, one of the shrinks there was doing some experimental treatments of sleep disorders. 2 people, actually. This doc named Neil Gordon and his assistant, a grad student named Nancy Thompson. They had 7 patients, all teenagers who'd been hospitalized for attempting suicide. Gordon found out the kids were suffering from a kind of shared delusion. Each of them had been having the same nightmare. That's pretty wild, said Chandler. It gets wilder, continued Curtis. Apparently things reached a crisis when a couple of the kids managed to kill themselves while they were staying at Weston Hills. Chandler arched an eyebrow. That had to have caused a hell of a scandal, didn't it? Enough so that Gordon had his privileges suspended. The hospital decided to make him the scapegoat, even though the deaths were really not his fault. He kept on working with the kids anyways, though, on the sly. Chandler made a face. Without any kind of parental approval or anything? Curtis nodded. It sounds to me like Dr. Gordon was either very gutsy or very stupid. Gutsy, I'd say, said Curtis. The reason why he kept at it was because he discovered the common thread tying the kids' nightmares together, and he thought he could help them. The common thread? Said Chandler. Let me guess, Freddy Krueger? Curtis nodded again. Every one of Gordon's kids was having dreams that Krueger was trying to kill them. The waiter reappeared to lay a plate of chicken marsala before each of them. He filled their wine glasses once more, asked if there was anything else he might do for them, and departed when Curtis told him that everything looked just fine. As she was cutting into her chicken, Chandler asked, So, Andy, can I assume you're eventually going to get around to telling me what all this has to do with your case? Curtis smiled. Lloyd suggested that I check into this Dr. Gordon's records because he happened to have been on the Weston Hills staff himself at the time of the scandal. He actually knew Gordon fairly well. He paused to take a bite of his meal. Chandler looked at him, her expression questioning. And? Well, this morning, when Lloyd read my notes on Gell, they rang a couple of bells for him. It turns out that Jerry Butler's got an alcoholic kid who's having hallucinations that are remarkably similar to the recurring nightmares my patient is having. Gene Chandler's eyes narrowed. When I have my session with Gell tomorrow, I'm going to ask her if she happens to know this kid, Harvey Baker, who's Jerry's patient, Curtis went on. Maybe I can find out why both of them are having nightmares about Freddy Krueger. His voice trailed off. Chandler urged him. And? He regarded her seriously. And maybe I can convince Lloyd that it's really all just a coincidence, to put his mind at ease. Maybe I can convince him that something awful that happened 5 years ago isn't starting to happen again. Gail Melican was alone in her darkened room. She stood at the room's solitary window, dressed in a thin nightgown. She was staring out at the night, gazing past the window's protective metal mesh, which obstructed her view. Outside, the falling rain glistened gem-like in the glow of the floodlights that illuminated the compound's exterior grounds. A rumble of thunder undercut the patter of the rain. Gil was listening hard to the rain and the thunder, concentrating on the sound. She was hoping that it would help her to stay awake. Her arms hung at her side. Both hands clenched. She lifted her right hand, opening her fist just as a flash of lightning lit up the world outside, bathing everything in a blue-white glow. In the brief burst of brightness, Gel could see the 2 pills she was holding in the palm of her hand. The pills had been given to her by a floor nurse an hour before. The nurse had watched her carefully as she mouthed the pills and swallowed a glass of water. Gel waited until the nurse had left the room, listening to her footsteps receding in the corridor outside. As the footsteps grew fainter, Gel spat out the pills she'd hidden under her tongue. One to help me sleep, one to keep me from dreaming, she thought, with bitter skepticism. She trusted none of them, none of the grown-ups, not her mother, nor her father, nor the nurse, nor even Dr. Curtis. They meant well, or so they said. We only want what's best for you, Gel. That's why you're here. But they didn't know. They simply didn't know. I can't go to sleep. I just can't. She turned from the window to look around the room. Her eyes adjusted to the gloom, the various shapes in the room resolving themselves into familiar objects. Bed, vanity table, chest of drawers. There were 3 doors. One to the room's closet, one to the bathroom, the third to the corridor outside. The third door was the only one that was locked. Gail gazed longingly at the bed. The covers were turned down, inviting her. All at once a sensation of weariness settled onto her shoulders like a heavy cloak. She shook her head fiercely, clearing away the cobwebs of fatigue that enveloped her brain. "Wake up, damn it!" she snapped at herself. She looked once more at the pills in her hand, then hurled them angrily away. The pills clattered on the room's linoleum floor. The sound seemed very loud to her in the eerie quiet that stalked the halls of the hospital at night. She winced. She moved quietly to a corner of the room near the bathroom door, beside the vanity. She sank to the floor, her back sliding down the wall until her haunches were resting upon the cool linoleum and the soles of her bare feet lay flat. She pulled her knees together, locking her hands, hugging herself tightly. The room was chilly, and she could feel goosebumps pimpling her flesh. Chilly was good, Gail told herself. The more uncomfortable she was, the less likely she would be able to nod off. Unconsciously, she began to sing, barely above a whisper. 7, 8, gonna stay up late. 9, 10, Freddy's back again. Then she hissed to herself out loud, "Stop it! Don't sing that," she thought determinedly. "Don't sing about him. Don't even think about him." Freddy Krueger in her mind. "Think about something else," Gail commanded herself. "Anything." "Like Mom and Dad?" "No, don't think about them either. They don't get along with each other. Think about school. Think about music. Think about performing. Think about anything else but them. It's my fault they don't get along. I was never the daughter I should have been. Music! It's all my fault they got divorced. Anything! It's my fault. I hate myself. Anything else, please. I hate them too. I hate them because they can't get along. Please! Hate! Please don't!" It was only when her eyes snapped open that Gail realized they had closed. She looked around, blinking several times, trying to focus. She saw where she was, and immediately she felt as if a cold hand were clutching her insides. Her heart was palpitating. She was back in the dream. "Oh, God," she whispered desperately. "Oh, God, no." She stood at the top of the central aisle of a deserted auditorium. At the end of the aisle was the stage. A single spotlight shone down upon a piano that began to play by itself. Her feet began to move, independent of any effort of her own will. One step, then another, and another. "Wake up, Gail," she pleaded with herself. "Please wake up." She climbed the stage. "Please wake up, please." She moved to the center of the spotlight. She stared out at the expanse of empty seats. She opened her mouth to sing. The sound that issued from her throat was torturous, the rusted creak of ancient hinges, amplified 1,000-fold, a million fingernails screeching across a million blackboards, the shriek and howl of a billion alley-cat choir. Then silence. The swell of applause built slowly like a wave, until the roar of adulation was thunderous, hundreds and hundreds of pairs of invisible hands beating together. Then silence once more, suddenly as if someone had turned off a switch. Gail looked down and saw a bouquet of red roses lying at her feet. She bent over and picked up the bouquet, clutching it to her chest. She watched the roses begin to bleed, felt the blood trickling over her fingers, dropped the bouquet, stared at her hands now stained with red. She opened her mouth once more, this time to scream, only to have the scream catch in her throat as a voice spoke to her from over her shoulder, a voice that was deep and low and utterly terrifying.
"That was wonderful, Gail,"
the voice intoned.
"But what can you do for an encore?"
Don't look at him, she begged herself futilely. She turned. He was rising from his seat at the piano, smiling as he approached her. His smile a rictus grin like that of a skull. His face hideously scarred, horribly burned, his eyes glittering insanely. He came to her. Her lips parted. "Krueger," she whispered. He stood before her, reaching up with his left hand to cradle her chin.
"Sing for me, Gil,"
he rasped. He raised his right hand. The glare of the spotlight glinted off his finger knives. He brought his face close to hers.
"I said sing!"
She opened her mouth wide and screamed. The finger knives flashed. Silence again. This time, forever. Andy Curtis was awakened by the shrill jangle of the telephone on the nightstand next to Jean Chandler's bed. The nightstand was on her side, and he heard her mutter. "Shit!" He felt the shifting of her weight as she reached for the telephone. She lifted the receiver in mid-ring and mumbled it into it sleepily. "Dr. Chandler." She listened for a moment, then nudged an elbow into Curtis's ribs. "It's for you," she grunted with annoyance. He could feel his face twisting into a puzzled frown as he pushed himself into a sitting position. His back pressed against the headboard of the bed. As Chandler handed him the receiver and settled herself again, he glanced at the digital clock that rested beside the phone. Luminous green numbers read 3:35 in the morning. Curtis wondered who in the world would be calling him in the middle of the night, and who would know to call him here. He lifted the receiver to his ear and said tentatively, "Hello?" A soft male voice said, "Dr. Andrew Curtis?" "Speaking." "My name is Neil Gordon. I'm sorry for waking you up." Curtis could feel electric fingers playing along his spine. He said, "Dr. Neil Gordon?" "Yes." There was a pause. "I wouldn't be calling you if this weren't an emergency. I'm afraid something terrible may have happened to Gail Melican." Curtis said disorientedly, "Gail? She's in danger. Freddy Krueger's getting too close to her." Curtis's mind was reeling. Wait a minute. Where the hell are you?" "I'm at the Lance Pate Institute in Florida. Listen, we really can't waste time talking. You've got to get to Gail right now." Curtis said, "Wait just a damn minute here." "There isn't time to discuss this. We will talk later." The line went dead. Curtis pulled the receiver from his ear, gaping at it wide-eyed. The earpiece buzzed at him. Chandler said groggily, her voice muffled by the pillow into which she had buried her head, "Andy?" When he didn't answer, she sat up and reached over to turn on the nightstand lamp. Bright light flooded the room. She squinted at him. He was still staring at the telephone receiver in his hand. All of the blood had drained from his face. She said anxiously, "Andy." He looked at her as if she were a stranger, someone whom he had never seen before. "My God," she said, her voice dark with uncertainty and concern. "What's the matter?" He answered her in a tone hushed with disbelief. That was Neil Gordon." Chandler said with astonishment. "Gordon?" An eep, eep, eep sound from the other side of the room startled them. Opposite the bed, next to a chest of drawers, was a chair, over which Curtis had draped his clothes when he had undressed for bed. The beeping sound came from the telephone pager in the pocket of his pants. He handed the receiver to Chandler, who replaced it in its cradle. Naked, he climbed out of bed and crossed to the chair. He rummaged in his trouser pockets, found his pager, and read the number of whoever had called him. He looked to Chandler and said, "It's work." After he'd returned the pager to his pocket, Curtis came around to her side of the bed and sat down on the edge. He lifted the telephone receiver and punched the number of SMHC's graveyard shift supervisor of nursing. He hung up 3 minutes later. He sat still for a time, trying to fight back a gorge of panic that welled inside of him. His mind was railing. This isn't possible, damn it. This is just not possible, Chandler said apprehensively. Andy. He turned to her. For several moments she watched him expectantly. At last she asked him, Can't you tell me what it is? His mouth was dry as sand. He had to lick his lips before he could answer her. He swallowed hard. Gail Melican's dead, he said. Curtis had to change planes twice en route from Springwood to Gainesville, Florida, where the Lance Pate Institute for Psychiatric Study was located. The first changeover came in Cincinnati, where he boarded the Delta flight to Atlanta. In Atlanta, he caught a shuttle flight to Gainesville. The entire trip took 5 hours, counting the time he spent waiting in airport terminals between flights. He arrived in Gainesville shortly after 12:30 p.m. on Monday, March 21st. He spent the entire trip thinking about Gail Melican, Freddy Krueger, and Neil Gordon. Here's our best estimation of what happened, Andy. She fell asleep. That much is obvious. How or why she ended up in the corner of the room, we don't have a guess. She was probably sleepwalking, maybe even acting out a bad dream. We found the Hypnosil tab and the Secobarbital over there on the floor where she threw them. It must have been a hell of a nightmare to make her do what she did. Biting clean through 1.25 inches of her tongue, and then swallowing it? She was dead when the night nurse found her. She'd choked to death on a piece of her own tongue. Can you believe that, Dr. Curtis? Oh yes, Curtis said darkly to himself, I believe it. But only because I'm beginning to understand exactly who and what Freddy Krueger is. That was the purpose of this trip to Gainesville. To learn directly from Dr. Neil Gordon all that he could about what had happened at Weston Hills 5 years before. Curtis had made up his mind on the afternoon of the 17th, St. Patty's Day. He had to see Gordon in person. However, it wasn't until Saturday that Lloyd Mayfield gave his approval for the trip. This following Friday evening's admission of 2 more teenagers named Betty Radoff and Terry Chevrolet. Neither of the teenagers knew the other, but both of them had made suicide attempts as a consequence of suffering recurring nightmares. Nightmares starring Freddy Krueger. The Lance Pate Institute was west of the Gainesville Airport, on the campus of the University of Florida. It was a trio of low-slung single-story buildings made of sandstone and surrounded by trees. A taxi cab deposited Curtis directly in front of the center building. He crossed a short sidewalk to a pair of glass double doors that hissed open to admit him to the lobby. He noted with the professional's eye that everything about the reception area was muted and round-edged and softly lit. Nothing to upset further the emotionally troubled soul, he told himself, feeling a slight pang of guilt over his cynicism. He approached a middle-aged woman who sat behind a teak reception desk. Mounted on the desk was a switchboard that looked to Curtis to be as complicated as the instrument panel of a Phantom jet. The woman wore a lightweight headset that had a thin strip of clear plastic for a microphone. She smiled at Curtis as he came toward her. May I help you? I'm here to see Dr. Gordon, Curtis replied. And you are? Dr. Andrew Curtis. As the receptionist pressed a button on the switchboard, she asked, Are you helping Dr. Pace with Dr. Gordon's treatment? Curtis regarded her with bewilderment. His treatment? Instead of replying, the woman said into her microphone, Lana, is Dr. Pace in his office? Dr. Curtis is here to examine Dr. Gordon. Curtis's confusion grew as he watched the expression shift on the woman's face. Listening to her headset, she looked at him. The corners of her lips turned downward, changing from a pleasant, vacuous smile into a perplexed frown. She uttered it into the microphone. But he says he's here to see Dr. Gordon. She listened to the headset a moment more, her frown deepening. Then she said to Curtis, I'm sorry, Doctor, but Dr. Pace's secretary says she has no idea who you are. Curtis was rubbing his forehead, utterly baffled. Just a moment, he said. Dr. Gordon is a patient? The woman's eyes widened. Hesitantly, she said into the microphone, Lana, can you please come out here right away? Curtis thought, she's looking at me like I should be locked away myself. So he said carefully, "Look, miss, I swear to you I'm as mixed up about this as you are. When I spoke with Dr. Gordon the other day, I just assumed he was working here. Honest to God, I had no idea he was a patient." The woman nodded. "Of course, doctor," she said too quickly. "I'd really appreciate it if you'd stop looking at me as if I were crazy." "Dr. Curtis?" He turned in the direction of the female voice. Standing at the head of a corridor leading to the rear of the building was a short, stocky, moon-faced black woman. She had dark, inquisitive, owlish eyes. She smiled politely. "I'm Mrs. Armstrong, Dr. Pace's secretary. What's this about you having an appointment with Dr. Gordon?" Curtis informed Mrs. Armstrong who he was and where he was from, and told her about the telephone call he'd received from Neil Gordon. "I'm afraid I have to apologize for the confusion," said Mrs. Armstrong when he'd finished. "Neither Dr. Pace nor I had any idea that you were coming. I hope you'll forgive us." "There's nothing to forgive," said Curtis. "It's as much my fault as anybody else's." She smiled gratefully. "Would you like to see Dr. Gordon?" "If it's possible, yes, ma'am." Mrs. Armstrong nodded. "Then follow me." As she led him down the corridor from which she'd come, Mrs. Armstrong explained Neil Gordon's situation to Curtis. "He's a voluntary patient. Actually, all of the patients here are voluntaries, in the sense that they have to give their consent before they can be admitted, since the work we do is highly experimental. But Dr. Gordon enjoys certain privileges that the other patients don't, partly because he's a psychiatrist himself, and partly because he used to be one of Dr. Pace's students. Dr. Gordon comes and goes as he pleases. He has unrestricted access to the telephones and so on." "Why is he a patient at all?" Curtis asked. She considered for a moment. "He's suffering from a fairly serious sleep disorder. That's all I know about. I'm sure he intends to discuss it with you. Otherwise, he wouldn't have invited you down." Curtis said, "I wasn't exactly invited." She seemed not to hear his remark. "It's kind of a unique situation with him, though, because he's helping to treat himself. He's really a good doctor. Everybody around here thinks the world of him." They turned down a perpendicular corridor, and immediately Curtis felt as if they had stepped into the hallway of a college dormitory. Mrs. Armstrong stopped before a door in the middle of a line of doors and knocked gently. A man with a slight southern accent called out from the other side of the door. "Who is it?" "Lana Armstrong," she called back. "I've got somebody with me who'd like to see you." "1 second." Curtis could hear footsteps approaching the door. A latch was thrown, the door pulled open, and in the doorway stood a bespectacled, narrow-shouldered man who had the physique of a distance runner. Curtis guessed the man to be a bit older than himself, 40 years old, give or take a year. He had bright eyes and a tasseled shock of sandy-colored hair, which was graying at the sides and temples. He was wearing sweatpants, jogging shoes, and a Tulane University t-shirt. Neil Gordon looked from Mrs. Armstrong to Curtis, smiled, and extended a hand. "I'm really glad you came," he said to Curtis. "I wasn't sure if you would or not." Turning to Mrs. Armstrong, he said, "I'm sorry, Lana. I should have told John that I was expecting Dr. Curtis to come see me." Curtis said, "John?" "Dr. Pace," Gordon explained. "The head honcho around here. Confessor, father figure, mentor, and world-class head shrinker. He's been helping me out a lot. God knows I can use the help." "Excuse me, Dr. Gordon," said Mrs. Armstrong, "but there are some things I need to get back to." She turned to Curtis. "Nice to have met you, Doctor." "You too, Mrs. Armstrong," said Curtis. And thanks." She smiled farewell at the two men and waddled off. Once he was certain that she was out of earshot, Curtis turned to Gordon and said, "You are the same Neil Gordon who called me the other night, aren't you?" Gordon nodded. "I don't know if you know this or not," Curtis went on without further preamble, "but Gail Milliken's dead." Gordon nodded again. "I thought that might be the case," he said solemnly. Curtis added, "Then I suppose the question is, how did you happen to know her life was in danger?" To which Gordon replied, "That's what you come all this way to find the answer to, isn't it?" That question and about a dozen others, actually. Gordon took in a deep breath that he exhaled slowly. He glanced over his shoulder back into his room for a moment, then looked at Curtis. I was just about to go on a little afternoon constitutional, since it's such a nice day out. How do you feel, Dr. Curtis, about taking a little walk with me? Okay, Slashaholics, this has been the first half of the short story La Morte de Freddy from the book Nightmares on Elm Street, Freddy Krueger's 7 Sweetest Dreams. I'll be back very soon with the second half, but what did you guys think of the connection to Dream Warriors there? Looks like Dr. Gordon's going to play a pretty big role in what comes up in the second half of this short story. I thought the Freddy dream sequence and kill was pretty well done. I bet there's more to come in the second half. But yeah, guys, I'd like to hear from you. What did you think of the first half of Le Morte de Freddy? You guys voted it to be the next short story on the channel in a poll here on YouTube. And we got half of it knocked out. I cannot wait to see what happens in the conclusion of this story. And thank you to our sponsors from Patreon, Carl Eakins, Catherine McClear, and Sean Campbell. Alright guys, I'll be back very soon with the conclusion of this story. Until then, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, thanks for listening, and pleasant screams!
I didn't know